Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Kris. This is the Y-Files about the Annunaki Gods from Planet Nibiru and the makers of man. This is part 3. It's going to be a 4-parter, and we're going to go ahead and get into it. But until we do, before I do, there's a thanks button on the channel. You can donate. You don't have to. All donations are appreciated. You can subscribe if you like any of the stuff I've done. Click the bell for reasons, and then if you don't want to do any of that, then just give me a thumbs up. That helps. Yeah, I almost ended the video there. Okay, let's get into it right now.
The farmer was startled awake. The sun was just rising over the mountains in the east. The animals always got restless at sunrise, eagerly awaiting their breakfast. But the animals were more than restless. They were going crazy. His wife groaned and rolled over as he launched himself out of bed. When he got to his barn, the farmer was shocked. His horses were literally screaming to get out of their stalls. One broke its neck trying to break free. His sheep were running in unison like a flock of birds, making a large circle within the pen. Occasionally, one would break off and throw itself against the stone corral. A few injured sheep limped around the perimeter. At least 2 were dead. It was madness. The farmer didn't know what caused the sudden alarm, but he was sure it had something to do with the object in the sky. His village first noticed it months ago when a new light appeared in the night sky. It looked like a star, as the sky gods called it. But the sky gods were gone now. After the new star appeared, they boarded great chariots that took them to the heavens. His people were on their own now. The object no longer looked like a star. It was almost the size of the moon. And like the moon, the farmer could see features on the great disk. Clouds were visible. He could see mountains and oceans. But unlike the moon, the object was visible during the day, constant and oppressive. He knew it was getting larger, or was it getting closer? It was difficult to tell. The farmer jumped when a flock of birds suddenly and loudly took flight. He scanned the forest and horizon beyond, and it seemed like every bird in the world had taken to the air. But there were no songs being sung. The birds were screeching. Then he felt it, a vibration. At first he thought it was his body trembling, but then realized the ground beneath his feet was trembling. The farmer felt the sound before he heard it, a hum so deep it was barely there, but the sound caused a wave of sickness to wash over him. He dropped to his knees to vomit when the world started tearing itself apart. He had experienced earthquakes before, some very powerful and frightening. Nothing compared to this. The ground shook and rolled like a boat at sea. Over his shoulder, he saw the barn crumble. He wondered how many of his horses were killed. He hoped his favorite horse survived. He wanted to run over and save what animals he could, but the tremor would not allow him to stand. Then his house collapsed. The farmer vomited again, knowing his wife and 3 children were still sleeping there. He hoped they slept through their death. They didn't. He heard his wife screaming from the rubble. He heard the wail of an infant. Then he heard himself screaming. But those sounds were suddenly overwhelmed by a great rumble as the ground lurched forward. The stone corral tumbled. Animals were knocked off their feet. Deafening thunder came next, but louder than any thunder he'd ever heard. The farmer covered his ears, but it was no help. What he couldn't hear, he could feel. He looked to the west. There was the grassy hill with the large olive tree. As far as he knew, the tree had been there forever. The graves of his parents and their parents were in the shade of that tree. He thought his grave might be there soon. Then from over that ridge, he saw what seemed to be mountains of fire. Flaming stones as big as houses were launched into the sky, through the clouds, and into the heavens. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Dark smoke billowed from something in that direction, and before he knew it, the blue sky had turned black. The morning sun had disappeared. but at least he didn't have to look at the great disc anymore. He finally got to his feet and staggered toward his house. All he could hear was the growl of the earth, but he knew his wife was still alive. If he could just get to her, maybe he could... Then, a hot coal landed beside him, the kind he'd seen in ovens at the market. It was bright red and aflame. Then another coal landed nearby, this one a bit larger. They hissed as they burned in the tall grass. He then realized the rocks of fire that were launched into the heavens were coming home. Soon stones made of fire were crashing all around him, and they were getting bigger. The barn disappeared in a hail of fire. On the ground, he saw the shadows. The stones were definitely getting larger, and they were bigger than houses, much bigger. The farmer stopped when one of the large shadows found him. He knew what was next. He said a prayer as the faint shadow in the grass grew larger and darker. He heard an approaching scream as the shadow spilled across his entire farm. Then everything went black.
So it was meteors? It's gotta be meteors, right? But what from? Was it the planet breaking up?
The fisherman was working frantically. The great disk in the sky was shaking the earth, and buildings were crumbling as if made of sand. He lashed ropes around a wooden pike to hold his boat in place. The waves were growing bigger, and his boat was thrashing violently. He hoped his knot would hold. Occasionally, a brick made of fire would drop from the sky and land in the water with an angry hiss. The fisherman was more confused than frightened. The morning was clear and peaceful, and the fish were biting. He was going to make a fortune at the market, but the storm had cut his trip short. Now a blanket of darkness covered the earth, and the wind was howling. Soon the wind's howl became a roar, and rain thrashed so violently that the drops left painful welts in his skin. The earth had been shaking for hours, or was it just minutes? He couldn't tell. When the small houses in the village fell, countless lives were lost, but there were some survivors. They were making their way to the caves nearby. The tremors made it slow going, but the fisherman was sure they'd make it. A gust of wind felt like a shove that knocked the fisherman off his feet. But this shove continued and continued. The wind was so strong, the man was pinned to the ground, face painfully pushing into the sand. Any houses that survived the quake would not survive this gale. He was being pelted with sand and debris, and boats that weren't tied down sailed through the air, exploding into splinters when they landed. He once again hoped that knot would hold. He managed to get to his feet as soil and dust whirled around him. He couldn't see more than 2 paces in any direction. Unsure of where to go, he followed the sound of a child crying. But that child sounded so far, far away. Then, as if the sky gods had commanded it, the wind and rain stopped. Debris fell to the ground as if dropped by the gods' hands. The earth stopped trembling, though he could still feel a rumble somewhere down deep. It could be the sound of hell itself. He saw a few stragglers wearing heavy packs on their way to the caves. Behind him, he heard a familiar sound, the sound of a river. But there were no rivers near the village. He turned around and saw that the sea had all but disappeared. Water was rushing away at a ferocious speed. But to where? Soon the ocean was a field of mud that stretched to the horizon. His boat dangled from the wooden pike. The knot held. Thousands of fish wriggled and flopped in the wet sand where the ocean used to be. He thought this would be the greatest feast the birds would ever see. Then he realized there were no birds, not a single one. With the water gone, the only sound was that of fish flipping over and over again, slowly drowning in the air. The fisherman's eyes continued to the horizon. He saw a great white cloud stretch from one end of the world to the other. He stood silently in awe. Then he realized it wasn't a cloud, it was a mountain, and it was growing. But how could it be a mountain? It was a mountain of water, a wave. The biggest wave he'd ever seen. The biggest wave anyone had ever seen. As it approached, its crest pierced the clouds, taller than any mountain, higher than any bird could fly, bigger than anything the fisherman had ever seen. His father had taught him how to steady his boat when a big wave hits, but his father never mentioned a wave that touched the heavens. Soon, what little light seeped through the gloom was snuffed out by the shadow of the wall of water. The wave rushed ahead at great speed. The man thought that not even the finest, fastest horse could outrun it. Within seconds, the wall of water was all he could see. It was coming. The man sighed and settled his breath. He'd been born by the sea, and he would die by the sea. This would be a good death. He closed his eyes, opened his arms wide, and smiled.
What the hell's happening? What the hell's happening?
In orbit, the Anunnaki watched the continents of the Earth sink beneath the ocean. Tiny islands, once the peaks of great mountains, appeared here and there, but there were too few for anyone to survive, for anything to survive. They knew the Great Flood was coming. Nibiru passes by the Earth every 3,600 years, but the distance varies. Sometimes Nibiru stays far outside the moon's orbit, and the effects on Earth are small. But sometimes, like this visit, Nibiru soared between the Earth and the moon at 40,000 miles per hour. The Anunnaki knew the Earth would be devastated. In the months prior, there was a lot of debate among the elder Anunnaki.
Yeah, Anunnaki.
At first, they decided to let humanity perish. Enlil said that humans served their purpose and now were nothing but a nuisance. A great flood was just what the Earth needed, a fresh start. But Enki had grown to love humans. Remember, he married a human woman. Enki offered Enlil and the other Anunnaki a compromise. The flood would come as planned, but one man and his family would be spared. Utnapishtim, a wise and good man. He and his wife and family would build a large boat.
An ark.
Yes, and on that boat, they would take the seeds of all living creatures. When the flood came, all life on Earth was destroyed, but Utnapishtim, his family, and the contents of his boat survived. Every day, Utnapishtim released birds to find land. One day, a raven did not return. He sailed in that direction. After a few days, the boat came to rest on an island that, as the waters receded, became a mountaintop. And now life, including humanity, would start again.
That's the story of Noah's Ark.
It is. But this version is from the Epic of Gilgamesh, written at least 3,000 years earlier. And the story's probably much older than that. Every culture and religion on Earth has a flood myth, which are all very similar to the Sumerian flood myth. Some cultures tell the identical story just with different names. So mankind is reborn. But this time, the Anunnaki put in some safeguards. They shortened the human lifespan. They made us more susceptible to illness. They made childbirth dangerous for both mother and child. They would not let the human population get out of control.
Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum would be proud.
They would.
You're gonna live in a pod and eat bugs, you know.
I am not eating bugs.
Worms are pretty good.
I like sushi.
Your jibe cuts me, sir. It cuts me to the quick.
Soon, new settlements and villages emerged, but all of humanity's previous knowledge was lost to the sea. They were back to the Stone Age. Enki and even Enlil were impressed by the resilience of man and decided to visit the settlements. The Anunnaki descended from the heavens and rose from the seas to give people the gift of civilization. Humans are taught reading and writing, mathematics, astronomy, and even engineering. They're taught how to build great cities. And some believe the Anunnaki helped them build huge structures like pyramids and obelisks found in Egypt and South America. And those pyramids and obelisks were built for a specific purpose, by the way. Tesla might have figured it out, but that's another story.
Tesla pyramid link below.
The last time Nibiru passed by Earth was about 700 years ago. That time happens to coincide with the emergence of the Sumerian civilization, the first civilization on Earth. Or was it? Nibiru passes by Earth every 3,600 years. Sometimes Nibiru comes so close to the Earth that the planet is wiped clean. About 13,000 years ago, the end of the Younger Dryas, was the time of the Great Flood. This coincides with a time when Nibiru would be passing by. Some believe a meteor impact caused the flood. Others believe it was a major solar event. But what if it was Nibiru that caused the ice sheets to melt and flood the Earth? What if that's the exact story that we've heard today? The earliest Great Flood myth comes from ancient Sumer, about 7,000 years ago. However, tablets and tablets of Sumerian writing still exist, writing that fills books upon books. The Sumerians wrote down everything. They said the Great Flood story, which was told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, happened many years earlier. The dates work out, and if the Sumerians were right, there was a civilization on Earth before the flood, as many researchers like Graham Hancock claim. Now, that previous civilization didn't have advanced technology, but they certainly witnessed it. Carvings and texts from ancient Sumer, India, China, Japan, Egypt, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, they all tell the same story. Gods who rode chariots in the sky, gods who created mankind, gods who destroyed the earth with a flood, and gods who helped us rebuild it. Nibiru is due to return around the year 2900. Now, maybe it will be a gentle transit, and humanity will continue to evolve and innovate. Maybe by then we'll have learned a way to communicate with the ancient sky gods.
Yeah, Annunaki.
Or maybe Nibiru's next visit will be a violent one, bringing with it another cataclysm that wipes the earth clean. So does that mean all of humanity is destroyed and we have to start again? I don't think so. Technology is going to keep moving forward. By the time the year 2900 arrives, I'm sure we'll be building outposts on the Moon, Mars, Europa, Enceladus. We'll be mining asteroids and stopping at Europa to refuel and refill our water tanks. Humanity will be a spacefaring species. And like we've conquered every corner of the Earth, I believe with a little luck and a lot of cooperation, we can conquer every corner of our solar system. Nibiru may destroy the Earth in the year 2900, but that's okay, because by then, we'll be the sky gods.
All right, I'm going to go and end this here. So the last one will be 18 minutes. But it's interesting so far. I mean, it's interesting. I can't say I believe it, but there's a part of me that wants to believe it. So anyways, I'm going to end this here. Oh man, my phone is blowing up. What is happening here? Uh-oh. What's going on? Okay. Alright. So anyways, I'm going to end this here. And I will be back with part 4. Part 4 will finish this whole video up. Alright? So until next time, have a good day, have a good night.